We're reading Bamidbar Chapter 21. As I've mentioned, or I might have not mentioned, so I'll give this preface to this chapter and many of the chapters or the stories in this part of the book. As we've said, this is sort of the third part of the narrative, the third part of the chronology. If we say the first part is the first year, the establishment of the Mishkan and the camp around it. Second part would be the beginning of the travel through the Midbar and the complaints and stories that have to do with it. And the third part is the end of the travel through the Midbar and the wars and also complaints and tests and challenges that happened with that. As we saw yesterday, we already had the deaths of the two of the three main leaders of the people during this first generation, all the way from Mitzrayim, which are Miriam and Aaron. So we're left only with Moshe, so to speak. And of course, Moshe's death was already talked about in the previous chapter. Right? Moshe is going to die in the desert, not going to take them into Eretz Yisrael because of the sin of Meriv. So we're very clearly at the turning point of the new generation. But we still have some parts to go through, some stories and even some conquests and some successes of Moshe at the threshold of the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. So we hear certain successes and certain not fully successes. And as we'll see, I think the best way to look at all these stories is that many of them are fragmentary. We have very little information. Of course, like for example, the beginning of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? The Parashat Sefer Shemos is at length the story of Moshe overcoming the challenges of Mitzrayim and all the 10 Makkos and all of that. The whole story of the establishment of the Mishkan and the camps around it were told to us in great length. There's no detail missing, or even many details that we think are superfluous, they're extra. There's a huge amount of detail. But when it comes to this, in particular, this part of the story, the last few wars that Moshe fought, the last few stories that happened, there's something very, very fragmentary in the way that they're told, in the way that they're recounted to us. We're missing sort of most of the narrative. There's even explicit references in this chapter, and possibly in some other chapters, to some books or some sources which apparently have more of these narratives and more full, but we don't have those books, or we don't have those writings or those songs or those sources, so we're kind of missing the main context, the main part of the narrative of the story. We have only like little parts, but this is what we're going to read. So the first thing is we hear another war with the Canaani, the King of Arad. Arad is somewhere to the south of Israel. Of course, the Eden are somewhere there. Not clear when this happened. This is something we saw something very similar already in the end of Parashat Shlach, when the Meraglim went and Vaknani Yoshev Banegev, and Arad is Banegev, and they fought with the people, the Ba'apilim, that went up to the land after the Meraglim, after they decided that they will go. And this might be some repeat or some version of that same story, or just another thing that happened again. In any case, he hears that the Canaani who lives in Negev, the Melech Arad, this is the exact Canaani that we discussed, hears that Yisrael came Derech Asurim, so some way over there called Atarim. This is some way or some place where they went, and he comes to fight with them. And he captures some captives. So apparently he was successful, at least in his initial battle. He captures some captives from the Yisrael. So there's a problem. And therefore, in response to this crisis, what they do is something we see very many times, not so much in the Chumash, but many times in Tehillim and Tanakh. Or one of the things someone does in a crisis is he makes a neder. He makes a promise. Of course, we've read in the stories of Kabbalah many times the concept of a neder, and as I've told you then already, the main concept of a neder is when someone is in a crisis, someone is in a tzura, someone is in a situation that is hard. He promises Hashem that if he will get better, if he will get out of this, he will bring a korban, he will do something for Hashem. So Yisrael, in general, the collective makes a neder, and they say, if you will give this people in my hands, this is kind of korban. So we'll see in Sefer Yeshua something similar, the concept of a cherem. In other words, I will not take it for myself, I will give it to you, I will give it like we learned earlier, halachas of a cherem, kol cherem b'Yisrael lechoyeh, goes to the Kehanim, it goes to the Mikdash, and so on. That's saying, that's going to be the fulfillment of their pledge, of their neder too. And Hashem listens, Vayishma Hashem b'kol Yisrael, a very nice pasuk. We have a lot of times we listen to the cry of Hashem, but Hashem listens to the voice of the people, and He gives Veitan as a Knani, and in other words, it's implied them. They win the battle, and they make a cherem for the Knani, for their cities, and that's why this place is called Charma. The interesting thing is, of course, that Charma was the exact name of the place where the Knani fought the battle and won against the Mapilim. The name of the place is mentioned in other places also, so there's some complication with this word Charma. There might be more than one place called Charma, named after the same idea of like Charma being the place where a cherem was made. It's obviously a name. It's giving this name a reason that it was called Charma, because this place was called cherem, because it was an edit that the people made. So that's one very fragmentary report. It's not clear what this war is about. I mean, obviously later they're going to go into Eretz Canaan and Sefer Yeshua and conquer also this Canaani. It's explicitly mentioned, if I remember, Melech Arad or Melech Harma. So there's something interesting about this story. There's Midrashim that try to deal with what's going on here and fill in some of the background and tell us what's happening, but that's what the report that we have here. Now we have one more story of a problem, of a complaint, and a very interesting response. So we've discussed several models of the complaints and the response that the Hashem has, or Moshe has, to the complaints. What we have here is a new kind of model, or maybe the most similar to what we happened after Parshas Koirach, when there was a Megaifa, and Moshe had we could call something like a sgula, some kind of technique to solve the problem. He told the Hana to bring Ketores, and here also we're going to have a solution. Hashem is upset and therefore causes a problem, and Moshe doesn't just do tshuva, or doesn't just beg Hashem to relent. He has a certain solution, it comes to a technical solution to the problem, and of course everyone knows the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah that discusses what kind of solution this might be, to reinterpret it in moral terms, but that's what happens. So what happens is, they go back from Hoy to Har. So remember, they were in Hoy to Har, that's where Har died, and they have to go back to go around Edom, because Edom doesn't let them go through. But the Nefesham becomes short. In other words, they become tired, they become maybe thirsty and hungry, but they become tired from the way. They don't have any more patience to go through. The way is getting longer and longer here, right? They're faced many obstacles and setbacks. And therefore, they speak about Hashem and Moshe, their leaders. So they're complaining against them, and they have their regular complaint that they always have. Why did they bring us out of Mitzrayim? We're going to die in the desert. There's no bread, there's no food. Yes, we have some here. They admit that they have some food, apparently the man, but similar to what they complained about the man in Parshas Ba'alois. Our souls, our bodies, our persons is already fed up with this not good bread, with this spoiled bread or not good bread. And Hashem in response sends nechoshim srafim, so strong snakes. Srafim many times over here means a snake. It's a snake that burns, something like a poisonous snake, something like venomous snakes, and they bite the people, and many die from these snakes. Of course, we're going to see in Sefer Dvarim, this is one of the very clear attributes of the desert, that there's venomous snakes in it. Nechoshim srafim, nachash sorav akrov. That's the kind of animal that you find in the desert, but obviously this was in response to their complaints that the desert is a bad place, so they got from the problems of the desert. Now the people come to Moshe and they admit their sin. They say, Chetoni, we have sinned, right? They say, Vidoy, we spoke about Hashem, so this is not Ba'enei Moshe or Ba'enei Hashem, right? He didn't hear. The people come to Moshe and say, and sort of apologize to him. They say, we've spoken against you, against Hashem. Please pray to Hashem, and he takes away the Nachash. And Moshe prays, but that prayer is not enough. Hashem tells Moshe, take one surf, in other words, one snake, one sort of snake, put it on a stick, on a kind of a flagpole. Everyone who was bitten will see it and become back healthy. V'chai meaning will be healthy. Chai can mean live, but chai can mean also become healthy. So that's what he does. Next is Nachash Nachoshes. It doesn't say, Hashem didn't tell him to make it out of copper, right? Hashem tell to make a snake, obviously means like an image of it, but made it out of copper. It's a nice alliteration. Nachash Nachoshes, Lushan Nefla Lushan called in Chazal. And he puts it on the stick. On nace is called a stick, right? A flagpole, something that you hang something, or some, like here, not a flag, it's like a statue or some image. And if any snake bites someone, they look at it and they become healed. And this is, like I said, something mysterious. What does this mean? What does this happen? Why did Hashem give him this solution? Something mysterious. And also, we can add all kind of background to understand it. But this is part of the fragmentary nature of these reports. There's something unclear here, something not very fully explained what's going on. Now we have a short report, as I've given this title here, Masois Veshirais. It's a report of, firstly, a travel report, so some fragments of something which we have the full version of in the end of Parshas Maseh, and in the end of this book, with all their stops, all the traveling in the desert. And it seems like this point of this is to get them from where they were, from Ha'ar, they went to Chasorim, all these places, all the way to the end goal of this chapter, so to speak, or of this part really of the book, is they will arrive at a place called Avos Moav. That's the last stop, that's where the important last part of the story happens. Also Sefer Dvarim, all is happening in Avos Moav. So they go first to a place called Oivos. From Oivos they went to a place called Iei HaAvodim, which is in the desert on the face of Moav, from the east of Moav. And then they go to a place called Nachal Zored. Then they come to a place called Ever Arnon, which is in the desert, going out of the border of Emoiri, because Arnon is a river, a famous river in what's called Transjordan, the other side of the Yarden, and where Moav is. And that river was the border of Moav, between Moav and Emoiri. Emoiri is one of the 7 nations of Canaan. So they went there, and apparently there's something going on with these borders, right? Some of the people they have a good relationship with, some of them they don't. And over here, there is a poem or a fragment of a poem quoted. Al Kenya Umar B'Seifel Mechames Hashem. So in other words, when you get to this place called Arnon, there's a fragment of a poem said, and then the poem is given a location. It said in Sefer Mechames Hashem. So apparently there was a book or a poem, maybe an oral poem called Sefer Mechames Hashem, and the Sefer Mechames Hashem has some epic poetry about the wars and the conquests and the challenges that people had on their way into Eretz Yisrael. And it says like this: Es vahev besufa ve'esa cholim Arnon. I think the most literal translation of this is these are names of places. Vahev, Sufa, the river is Arnon. So these are apparently places, or maybe names for the same place. Ve'eshdan cholim means something like the delta of these rivers, which go to Ar. Not they tend towards Ar. So Ar is famously one of the cities of Moav. V'nish anlik Moav and goes to the border of Moav. And there was also the Be'er. So here's the first time we have this concept of a Be'er. Of course, one of the big problems of the desert that there's no water. We had the stories twice, right over here, last chapter, and in Sefer Shemos of Moshe hitting a rock and making it into a Be'er, but it's not called a Be'er. Here's the first time where there's a Be'er. And of course, the most literal meaning would be something like, over there in that area, they found some kind of well. Hashem told Moshe to gather the people, and I will give them water. This might mean the water, the well in the sense of became a well, but it was really what the rock that Moshe made into a well, or it's just a well that Moshe somehow dug or discovered there. We remember the stories of the digging of the wells in Sefer Bereshis. It's a big deal when you find a well in the desert or in places that are close to the desert where it's hard to find. So that's part of the story. And it quotes another song. It says, this is when the Yisrael sang this Shira. So apparently there was a Shira that is known later also. There's this Shira like we discussed, or we didn't, in Shira Sayam. This is when they first sang this song, but of course we still sing it. It's a song that's repeated or sung later. And the same way there was a song about the Be'er. The song goes, Ali Ve'er Anula, rise, well, and answer to her. So they're sort of singing to this well, or about this well, or about this great accomplishment that they found well. And they say, Be'er Chafru Asarim, the princes of us, or Nedive Am, which is another word for princes, have dug it. V'mechoykek, the lawgivers, or the people who are digging. Mechoykek can mean someone who digs or makes a ditch, or a kind of digging in the earth or in something, with their sticks. So there's some play on words with the sticks. Of course, we discussed already Shevet, Anasi, someone who has a stick, but this stick can be also said as like the stick that sort of like digs in the earth and makes a be'er and finds water. So that's the important thing, how they find water. And now we go back to, this also seems to be written poetically, but it's also description of more masois, more travels and stops. They go from Midbar to Matana to Nachliel to Bamais, to the final stop, which is Agesh Moav, the valley in the fields of Moav, Pisgah, with the head of this mountain called Pisgah, which from which you can see the Pnei Hashimain, the entire valley or the entire state straight, the plains, over there. It might be also a proper name, or also just means the plains. And that's, as I said, that's the last place where they're going to. That's this poem is describing this like last few chapters, the last few stops where they get to there. But we still have two more important short reports of wars in this chapter, and we have to talk about them quickly. So similarly we're reading here about this in the previous chapter, three important wars that Moshe led, not wars or attempted wars, that Moshe led with three different nations around Israel. The first was Edom, which they've sent a message and didn't let them go through, so they passed by him. Then there was another one, the same thing, they sent Malachim, they sent Shlichim, they sent messengers to Sihon, the king of Amori. So we've heard of Moav and Amori, right? Amori is the one on the other side of the Arnon. And they asked him the same thing, we're not going to drink your water, we're not going to go into your fields, into your vineyards, we'll go in Derech HaMelech, in your highway. And Sihon did not allow them to pass by, unlike Edom, which didn't let them pass by and came across to them, came towards them with his army, and the people, the Bnei Israel, passed, sort of lost or not retreated. For Sihon, they did not retreat. So Sihon comes to the place called Yahatza, and he fights with the Eden there, and they fight him back. They kill him by the sword, and they take his land, they conquer his land from the Arna until the Yabik. There's the two rivers, or the two limits of Sihon's land, Eretz Amori, all the way till Bnei Ammon. So on the other side, apparently, or maybe where the Yabik is, there's the limit, or the boundary there. Border of Bnei Ammon, that's ours. That's strongly defended. They couldn't take that, but they took all of the land of Sihon, which is from Arna till Yabik. So they took all these cities, and they sat in all these cities known as Cheshbon, and all the daughter cities of Cheshbon, like the cities around it, or cities and like their suburbs, not suburbs, those days was not suburbs, but they're like other cities. Cheshbon was sort of their like head city, and the other cities called their daughters, they were all taken by the people. And this does give some historical note. Cheshbon was the city of Sihon, although it was originally his land. Originally it was belonged to Melech Moav, because this whole area is called Arves Moav, or the area of Moav, plains of Moav. But Sihon has fought a war with the first king of Moav and taken his land all the way to Arnon. And it quotes another poem. The poets, or the people who say Proverbs, had a poem, and also this poem is very geographical, full of names of cities, of places. And apparently this poem was about Sihon's conquest of Moav. So the Torah is quoting some kind of Sihon poem, some kind of poem that Sihon Melech Amori was singing about, or the Moshlim. We'll see next week in the next chapters about Bilam, who was one of the Moshlim, one of the ancient poets or prophets that would say poems about the nations around Israel. So similarly, one of these poems was about Sihon's great conquests of Moav, and as it says, "Boy Cheshbon, come to Cheshbon, Ir Sihon, the city of Sihon will be built up. Ki Eishat mecheshbon, a fire came out of Cheshbon, a fire," and there's these doublings of as is common in biblical poetry. A flame from the city of Sihon, it ate the city of Moav called Ar. Ba'ali b'mis Arnon, it ate also the high places of Arnon, which is again the river that's in Moav. And this poem goes on to say, Oilecha Moav, woe to you, Moav, you've lost Am Kemosh, the people of Kemosh. Kemosh was the name of the god of Moav. Their people, or Am Kemosh is another way of saying Moav, is lost. His children are fugitives. His daughters are captives. They're all given to the king Sihon Melech Amori. And they were also lost from Niram. They're either a place called Niram, or it's a word for their kingship, was lost from Cheshbon until Divon, or from Nashmal till Noivach, which is next to Medva. These are all places and cities that Sihon took from Amori, from Moav, and Israel now, Yisrael conquered from Sihon, therefore sat and is all these places. So that's one more war that we discussed. Now there's even one more very short report of a very short war, a place called Yazer. Doesn't say who lived there, part of Amori, but maybe it also belongs to Sihon, but has a separate report of the war. So Moshe sent spies, meraglim, spies to Yazer, and conquered it, Bnei Seo, the daughter cities of Yazer, and conquered it, took it from the Amori who lived there. One more report, which is the next king, Melech. They turned around, they went through Bashan. Bashan is somewhat higher, more north, so to speak, and also in the what is now Jordan, Syria, Golan, places like that. And Og, the king of Bashan, comes and fights with them. It doesn't say that they asked to go through him. Apparently, he just unprovoked, or they were planning to go through him anyways. It's not clear why this war with Og started. And here, apparently, Moshe was scared, because we have a report of Hashem telling Moshe, don't be afraid, because I've given him and his people and his land in your hands, and do to him what you did to Sihon, the king of Heshbon. So, in other words, Hashem reminding Moshe, look, you're powerful, you're able to conquer Sihon, you'll be able to conquer Og in the same way. And that's what they do. They hit him, they destroyed him, his children, his nation, until there was nothing left from him, and they took his land. And that is really the chapter finishes here. But I think we should do, like I said here, one more pasuk. From there they go to Arves Moav, which is on the other side of the Yarden Rech Me'evim. In other words, from the perspective of the land of Israel, it's on the other side, what we call Transjordan, or the east bank, right? The east bank of the River Jordan. That's their last stop, and there we're going to have the rest of the stories going to play out there. So all of this last two chapters were really condensed and fragmentary reports of the second half, so to speak, of the journey of the people in the desert. And that's what the end of chapter 21.